Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sara Spinks.
Today we're discussing a topic that has sparked debate and concern: stealthing. It's a term many might not be familiar with, but it carries serious implications both legally and emotionally. Stealthing refers to the act of removing a condom during sex without the other person's consent. It's not just a breach of trust, it's a violation. In many places, including the UK, stealthing is recognised as sexual assault, but the legal framework around it is still evolving.
Yeah, and I think part of the issue is that for a long time, stealthing has existed in a sort of grey area. There's this misconception that if someone consents to sex initially, everything that happens during that encounter is acceptable. But consent is not static. It's ongoing and conditional.
Exactly. One of the reasons this conversation is gaining traction is due to landmark cases around the world. California set a precedent in 2021 by becoming the first US state to explicitly make stealthing illegal. And that law clearly defined stealthing as sexual battery, reinforcing the importance of explicit consent throughout sexual activity.
And I think since then, there's been mounting pressure, for the UK to adopt similar legislation.
Yeah.
While stealthing can be prosecuted under existing sexual assault laws here, the lack of explicit wording means that survivors often face barriers when seeking justice. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? In 2021, there was a case in England where a man was convicted of sexual assault for stealthing. And the judge ruled that consent was conditional on the use of a condom. And by removing it, the man committed a crime. However, cases like these are rare and many victims don't know that they have the right to report it.
Yeah, and I think that is actually part of the problem, Sam. Without specific legislation, it's hard to prosecute. Survivors may feel that their experiences won't be taken seriously or that they'll face blame or misbelief. The legal ambiguity creates an environment where perpetrators might feel emboldened even.
Yeah, and it's actually just making me think a little bit about using these sort of colloquialisms, the word like we did with upskirting. Upskirting is now entrenched in law, and maybe, that's something that needs to be looked at too. I mean, the statistics are deeply troubling. A study by the British Journal of Criminology found that stealthing is alarmingly prevalent. Around 12% of women and 10% of men surveyed reported having experienced it. And that's a huge number of people whose boundaries have been crossed without their consent.
Absolutely. Those figures are staggering. And I think while it disproportionately affects women, men and the LGBTQ individuals are also targeted.
Yeah.
The reality is that stealthing can happen to anyone, which is why this needs to be part of that broader conversation about consent and sexual violence.
Absolutely. One of the more shocking aspects is how stealthing is sometimes trivialised or even normalised. There are online forums where perpetrators share tips or boast about their actions. They treat it like a joke. I mean, it's horrifying to think that this kind of behaviour is not just happening, but it's being encouraged.
And I think that's where the safeguarding aspect comes in. Schools and organisations that work with young people need to address these issues directly. Relationship and sex education, RSE, in the UK, it's been updated to cover consent, but stealthing should be explicitly mentioned. Young
agree.
people, they need to understand that anything less than full consent is unacceptable.
Yeah, I completely agree, Sarah. And it's also a safeguarding issue in terms of the workplace. Universities, for example, they're increasingly aware of stealthing, and many have introduced policies to protect students. For example, the University of Cambridge made headlines by including stealthing in their sexual misconduct policy. And that's a step forward, but it highlights how much more needs to be done.
Yeah, and I think it's crucial to emphasise that stealthing isn't just about sexual violence. It also has wider implications for public health. By removing a condom without consent, perpetrators are exposing their partners to the risk of sexually transmitted infections and unplanned pregnancies.
Yeah, right. And the psychological impact is just as severe. Survivors report feelings of violation, shame, and even trauma. And for some, it leads to a breakdown in trust and intimacy in future relationships.
And it's not just that personal impact, is it? It's the systemic failure to protect survivors. And this is why campaigners are calling for the UK government to introduce clearer laws, similar to California's. A petition was launched last year urging Parliament to create legislation specifically criminalising stealthing. But I think the progress has been slow.
I think part of the reason for that is the fear of overcomplicating sexual assault laws. And, we do need to be careful with that. They are incredibly intricate, aren't they? Some policymakers argue that existing legislation already covers stealthing. But the problem is that survivors often need to fight harder to prove that what happened to them was non-consensual.
Yeah, and that's why explicit laws matter, isn't it? They send a clear message to the public, to the survivors, to the perpetrators that stealthing is illegal and unacceptable. There's no ambiguity, no loophole in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said earlier, just using that word in the legislation would be so helpful in terms of prosecution.
Definitely.
So, what can we do as individuals? If someone experiences stealthing, they should know that they can report it to the police. Even if they're unsure about pursuing legal action, there are organisations that offer counselling and advice.
I think that's really important. And for those who want help, supporting campaigns, signing petitions, spreading awareness can make a real difference. As you say, you link it to upskirting, that's exactly what happened. Conversations like this, raising awareness and challenging the normalisation of stealthing, they're crucial to form part of that change as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, silence only benefits the perpetrators, let's be honest.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So by speaking out, we can push for better protections, stronger laws, and a safer, more respectful society.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If today's episode resonates with you, please share it and keep that conversation going.
Yeah, and if anyone listening has been directly affected by stealthing, support is available through organisations such as Rape Crisis, Survivors UK, and of course, Victim Support.